Is someone you know addicted to porn? Well, here's why. I'm Dr. Trish Leigh. Let me tell you. In this video, we are going to break down 3 very powerful concepts. Number 1, how porn becomes addictive in the first place. Then we'll go right into number 2, the cycle of a pornography addiction as it relates to neurochemicals in the person's brain, the brain performance pattern in terms of how it uses electricity. I promise it'll be easy to understand. And then lastly, how that impacts the person's behavior and drives them to watch porn. And then lastly, number 3, I always provide a brain tip strategy for people who are struggling with pornography addiction. Here in this video, I want to present a brain tip strategy to you, the loved one of someone who is struggling with porn. So stay tuned for that brain tip. Okay, number 1, how does porn become addictive in the first place? I am here to tell you porn is highly addictive and it is flying under the radar. Hence my presence on the scene, because someone that I know has been impacted by pornography addiction and nearly destroyed their life. And that inspired me to learn everything to inspire you. So this is what happens when it comes to pornography addiction. An unassuming child, kids, unassuming child finds pornography and it floods their brain with the neurochemical dopamine. It is the pleasure-seeking neurotransmitter. So now the average age of exposure is around 8 years old. It used to be 10 to 12 years old. Thank you, internet, right? Am I right? But we'll get there eventually. So what happens when a kiddo is exposed to pornography, even if they find it disgusting or repulsive? So many men tell me the first time they saw it, they were repulsed by what they saw, but it lit their brain up on fire in a good way, which brings them back for more. So the way it becomes addictive in the first place is this flood of dopamine in the system. So then the system tries to calibrate that flood so that it can get back to normal, to homeostasis. But in doing so, it's trying to level these levels out and make sense of them. So then when the person goes back for the second time, they actually need more dopamine to get the same rush as the first time. It is called habituation. And from there on, the brain is always recalibrating. And unfortunately, pornography damages a person's brain. So what happens is the frontal lobe becomes deactivated, which it has many negative consequences in terms of thinking and judgment. But for this discussion, we will talk about how it decreases the ability of the person to put the brakes on, to not go back to porn. So their brakes are turned off and their brain is linked now to porn for that feel-good feeling. So the frontal lobe's dropped out and there's no brakes. At the same time, the reward center is getting flooded over time every time the person consumes porn, and it is frying out the receptors in the reward center, which means they need to go back for more and more and more to continue to attempt to get that good feeling. They need more frequency, more consistency, more intensity in terms of genres that they are exposing themselves to. And that is how the addictive nature of pornography hijacks a person's brain and then keeps pulling them back into the screen. So porn is a super normal stimulus. The level of stimulation literally can't be found in nature. It cannot be found with one's partner. It is highly stimulating visually, mentally, and then usually it's coupled with masturbation, which is highly stimulating physically, more stimulating than if you were with a partner. So it pulls you in. Now, the caveat is usually there's family dysfunction or trauma in that child's world. So the world is chaotic and this stimulus is so pleasurable that there's also a push into the screen as well. The number one reason that people consume pornography is not for sexual satisfaction. It is for mood regulation, to decrease anxiety most times, secondarily to take the edge off of boredom. So that is how porn becomes addictive. Now, number 2, what does the cycle of porn addiction look like? Once a person is sucked into this, cycle of needing to go back for more, there's a very deliberate cycle that happens internally in terms of neurochemicals, and then it plays out externally as behavior. And it goes like this. Up at the top of the cycle, there is a trigger. The trigger typically is a stressor. So something stressful happens and the person's brain, which I call the hijacker, the addiction, the hijacker goes, that's stressful. That's an uncomfortable feeling. I don't like that. I don't want to have to go do that work right now. I've got an idea. Let's watch porn. The minute the person has the thought that they're going to watch porn, dopamine starts dripping into the system. And then usually it's ritualized. People have a ritual in terms of times, physical location, kind of what they're doing, if they set things up, those types of things. That ritual gets the dopamine flowing in the system even before they consume pornography. So in the end, this addiction actually is internalized, and that's important because I'm going to shed some light on that in a minute. So then when they actually start a porn session, that dopamine's flowing in the system. So what it creates is escapism. It numbs the uncomfortable feelings that they were feeling in the first place, and it makes them feel good. It lights their brain up. It feels great, and they feel numb. It is escapism. It is self-soothing from what has become a painful world. Now, the reason the world has become so painful is because there's so much dopamine in the screen that it makes it so there could never be enough dopamine in the world like there is for healthy people. So when a healthy person goes to work and they're working on small pieces to a big project, they get excited and their brain gets dopamine drips there. And then as the project culminates and they see the reward of their small steps towards a bigger goal, they get more dopamine. That's healthy dopamine. And then they go out to dinner with their friends and they laugh, more dopamine. Then they go scuba diving on vacation, more dopamine from your hobbies. But that's lacking because now there can never be enough dopamine there as there is in this super normal stimulus of porn in the screen. I call it the easy button. It's an easy button. You get all the reward with none of the work. So unfortunately, it trains the brain. Don't go into the world. There's nothing there for you. Come back here, hit the easy button, and get it flowing again. Now, that's during a porn session. So what happens eventually after a porn session is dopamine levels fall low while cortisol, the stress hormone, the stress neurotransmitter, goes higher. It's an A-B effect. A, they feel good during the session. B, after the session, whether it be immediately, the next day, 2 days later, they feel worse. They feel anxious, they feel depressed, they feel guilty, there's shame. A pornography addiction is built on shame in the first place, and it's perpetuated by the shame of going back for more. And especially if the genres have moved into the extreme, especially if it has violence. Most of pornography has violence against women in it. So it becomes very incongruent with the morals of the person watching it, but they can't stop because their brain needs that intensity. It creates a ton of friction and tension internally, which creates a ton of anxiety and depression, anger, irritability. I talk about that as Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. So if you have a loved one who is addicted to pornography and you never know which version of that person you're going to get, sometimes you get the happy, up, loving, super fun, all jazzed up person who's like, let's take on the world. That's the version that just got the dopamine hit. Sometimes that version shows up when they're planning a porn session for the next day because dopamine's already flowing. It's called overly bright. So if someone's overly bright, it's because they just watched porn or they know they're going to. And it becomes a little difficult for a partner or for a loved one of someone who is in a porn addiction to know if they're moving towards it or away from it. But as they move away from it further, then you get the angry, irritable, the nasty version who is not happy with anything, perceives everything as an attack against them, is not happy, can't be contented, might make comments, that version. So that is neurochemically driven, which is what I want you to know, that it is addictive in the first place, and then the person gets sucked into this cycle. So let's move on to number 3, which is your brain tip. And I'm sorry to tell you that it is a little challenging to pull off. If you have a loved one who is sucked into this porn cycle, here's what I want you to know. They are not choosing to do it. They might even think they are because they need it. It's like an alcoholic who thinks that they like to drink. They don't realize that it is a compulsion, that they need to drink to feel okay. And it's a very fine line when that tips in terms of porn addiction, because unlike alcohol, your loved one started this back when they were young, when they were 10 years old. So the difference is this addiction has been brewing over all that time. For alcoholics, it starts in adulthood, and we know porn's highly addictive, even more so because people are younger when they're exposed to it. The younger the brain is, the more it's hijacked and the more difficult it is for the person to walk away from it because their brain doesn't know any better. If the person was 8 years old when they found it, it means developmentally they only had 8 years of healthy brain development. After the age of 8 or whenever they discovered porn, their brain has become damaged and is using diseased neural mechanism. It is, in fact, a disease. It's dis-ease in the nervous system. It is not a choice. And because it is driven around sexuality, and because it seems like a person is choosing porn, or porn use actually escalates into affairs, into using prostitutes, to sexting, to webcam sex, it escalates because when a person consumes pornography and sees these genres, they then want to experience them, and they are not acts that the average human being, a healthy human being, wants to do. So it escalates because they need even more of that dopamine. But here's what I'm here to tell you is it is an addiction. Nobody chooses to be addicted to something. It happens over time with these neural mechanisms changing and using these diseased, unhealthy neural pathways over and over and over for many years. So it can be very difficult for a person to overcome by themselves. And when I discovered this with my loved one, the person that I care about, I had to figure it out so I can help other people do that. And I now have dedicated my life to that in a nonprofit organization, dedicating my life to helping people move away from porn use and heal their brains and heal their families and their relationships and their jobs and their love for life. And at the same time, my nonprofit is creating preventive programs so we can stop kids from ever getting in this cycle in the first place. So I'm here for that. But let's get back to you, is that this is the brain tip. You have to have compassion for your loved one. I know it's very difficult because you're angry and you're mad and you're offended. This isn't about you. And I actually don't even like to equate it to alcohol because so many people normalize alcohol, just like porn's being normalized these days. I prefer to think of it as one of two things. It's more like an eating disorder. So when people have eating disorders, which does change the neural mechanisms and they're diseased, they have to learn how to eat healthy again. They can't just give it up because sexuality is a part of being a healthy human being. So they can't just stop. They have to figure out how to unhook those neural pathways they've been using for a long time and create new ones and start using them. And I also use, probably not a good analogy, but I think it's a good way of thinking about it, is I use an analogy. It's like you found out your loved one has cancer. Now, I use cancer, and I don't mean to offend anybody with cancer. I have not lots of, thankfully, but I have loved ones with cancer, and my heart goes out to people with cancer. It's not about that. What it's about is if you found out that your loved one has cancer, you wouldn't be mad at them for having cancer. So when you think about cancer, instead of alcohol or pornography, it takes that emotional component of how it impacts you out of it. They don't mean to have cancer, and yes, it's going to make your life difficult, and yes, you are going to have to figure out how to beat cancer, but you would stay by your loved one who has cancer. You wouldn't go, oh, you have cancer? That is so offensive to me. you would say, oh my goodness, my loved one has cancer. I need to figure this out. I am going to have compassion for that person who is struggling. I'm going to open my heart and have empathy for that person, and I am going to support them. But unlike cancer, this is the second part of your brain tip. Unlike cancer, you will have to set boundaries for your loved one like we do in addiction. Boundaries can be really powerful. A boundary says, I respect myself enough that I'm not going to allow you to treat me this way. So if you're a partner of someone who's addicted to porn or is acting out sexually, you can love them and you can care for them and you can have compassion for them and you can still be there for them, but you can set boundaries that makes it so that their behavior doesn't impact you as much emotionally, because it does hurt when someone is acting out sexually and they're supposed to be your partner. So a boundary saying, you know what, I'm not going to sleep with you, have sex with you. I'm not going to sleep in the same bed as you. I'm not going to do these things. And those are just examples. Setting a boundary that makes you feel safe so that you can help your partner get through recovery, because recovery for porn addiction is totally possible. And now we're going to segue to me just telling you a little bit about the program that I've created. I've created a program that exists at 3 different levels: introductory, small, medium, and of course large, which is what most people need to recover from a porn addiction. It is a nonprofit organization, so you can write it off as a donation, but I've put together the program scientifically, because it is what people need to recover. You can't go willy-nilly against this thing. It's literally a hijacker that has jumped into your car and taken the wheel. You need a plan. You need a solid plan that includes all the important aspects that must be investigated, turned over, resolved, and then rewire your brain so that it is working in a better way, healthier. That's why I use brain training. I am a neurofeedback practitioner. We use neurofeedback in all of my programs so that we start rewiring your brain by itself without depending upon a person who has an addiction. And from there, after we rewire the brain using brain training, then we establish new routines and habits and thought processes and emotions so that we can hardwire in that new, better pattern. So if you're interested in thinking about a program for your loved one, encouraging him, setting a boundary, please check out my programs at drtrishleigh.com. I would love to help. And if you see up in the tab on the top, it says Porn Brain Reboot, and then next to it says Partners. We have programs for partners too, because partners struggle through this, and the healthier and the more informed a partner is, the better everybody heals and recovers. Okay, I hope this helps you out. And until next time, control your brain or it'll control you.